Right, hello everyone. Yeah, so if you haven't met me before, I'm Finley. I'm one of the social secretaries along with Ross over here. So 3 things I want to mention this evening. Firstly, intramural sport. Saturday at 6 p.m. we are playing football, and Sundays at 5 p.m. we're playing netball. So come and talk to, I think, is it me, Ross, Lizzie. There are a few of us on committee who are sorting this out, so come and talk to us afterwards if you're interested. Secondly, Urban Underground Social. So on Monday, this is going to be after the workshop, we're going down to Urban Underground. So instead of going to the Ramp like we usually do, 8:30, we'll leave the workshop, head down to Urban Underground in town. If you haven't been there, it's a really nice cocktail bar. We've booked a space. So come join us after the workshop. That should be really good fun. And thirdly, which is the one I'm most excited about, the Rail Ale Trail. This is a pub crawl via train across Devon. We will be getting tickets to Barnstable. We will be going out to Barnstable. We will be going to a pub at Barnstable. Then we will be taking a few stops on the way back across Devon, taking in the scenery and the fine beers and ales that this place has to offer. This is going to be next weekend, so that's Saturday, 10th of October. We're limiting it to 30 places. Obviously, this is a fairly major undertaking, and we don't want any of you getting lost, eaten by cows, crushed by a train, whatever. So we're going to limit it to 30 tickets. We're going to let that go live tomorrow at 9 a.m. We're going to have a Google form up. We'll post all of that so you can see it. You're probably aware this is the same week as the one of the amateur IVs, is it? Amateur IVs. So you can feel free to apply. If you do get into the IV, then we just shift tickets onto other people. So just, if you're interested, sign up on the Google form tomorrow. It should be a really good day. We're leaving at 11 in the morning and getting back some time.
Excellent. Thank you, Finley. And a couple more things from me, which is, if you're interested in becoming like one of these lovely speakers we have here, the first step on the road is the novice competition, which is happening next weekend at UCL, and then there's one on the 1st of November at Imperial. These are for people with no debating experience before. So if you're interested in giving competitive debating a go, do email George and Daisy, who are also sat here, to hear all about that and get involved in the selection debate, which will be happening sometime next week. Final announcement before we get on to this evening is next week's debate. The motion is, this House would not satirise religious figures. Those of you familiar with the Charlie Hebdo affair, I'm sure will be very interested in this. We have 4 outside speakers coming down for that. They're prestigious names, and the names will be up on the Facebook group tomorrow, so look out for those. Which brings me to why things are a little bit different this week. So what we wanted to do this week was give you a showcase of what the best of Exeter debating is. And we want to show you debating is not just a battle of your deeply held ideas, it's also an activity where you learn to argue and dispute with each other. So these people tonight are not necessarily representing their own views, they're representing the views of the motion. So don't get too angry with them. Although I promise you it will be impossible to tell the difference. And they're all second year students, so next year this could be you. Anyway, enough talking from me. I'm now going to hand over to Charlie, who's going to introduce tonight's debate, and we'll kick it off. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Let's start the debate. The motion tonight is, this House believes that men have no place in feminism. And it's our first student speaker debate of the year. So I'm going to start by telling you about our lovely speakers. The first person on the proposition is Daisy Ohan. She is a second-year English student, and she is Exeter Debating Society InterVarsity Captain 2015. She was also a finalist at the Imperial InterVarsity Debating Tournament 2014 and broke the Exeter Speakers record at London Pro-Am competition with her teammate, Megan Maunda. So Megan is a second-year mathematics student, and she's the Exeter Debating Society Treasurer 2015. She was an Exeter Internal Competition finalist and winner of the Imperial Varsity Debating Tournament 2014. Now on to the opposition. Equally impressive is Mr. George Siddons. He is a second-year PPE student, an Exeter Debating Society Freshers Representative 2014, and this year another InterVarsity Captain 2015. He was also an Exeter Internal Competition finalist and winner of the Bath InterVarsity Debating Tournament 2014. And last but not least, we have Georgia Drinkwater. She is a second year, this is a mouthful, International Relations and Middle Eastern and North African Studies student with a bit of Persian studies. Great. So she was a speaker in the House of Lords on the topic of Parliament in the Digital Age. and she is the Publicity Officer for Student Action for Refugees, the General Secretary of the Quilliam Society, and Chair of the newly founded Exeter University Students for Europe campaign. So she's got lots of time on her hands. All right, so before we start the debate, I am just going to go through the debate format for those of you who don't know, or if this is the first time you've ever come. So we will start with a vote on conscience. So this means that I will ask you what you think of the motion, and you can either choose to propose it, oppose it, and you will have the chance to abstain. You will then hear from each of our lovely speakers for 5 minutes, completely uninterrupted, before it's handed over to you guys, where you have 30 minutes where you can put your questions to the panel and grill them completely, either by showing up your hand or via Twitter, via the hashtag DebSoc, which you can start tweeting right now. And we suggest you think about your question now, because there will be a bottle of wine for the best question. Then we will hear a 2-minute summary, one from each side, before we have a final vote on the merits of the argument, where you may propose the motion, you may oppose the motion, but you can no longer abstain. All right, let's start with the vote on conscience. If you believe that men have no place in feminism, please raise your hand. Thank you. If you oppose the motion that men have no place in feminism, please raise your hand. And if you abstain. All right, you've got like 9 people to convince. All right, so I start with the very lovely Daisy Ohan. You have 5 minutes.
I feel that the onus is on me to define feminism. I will then be discussing gender norms, men's voices in feminist spaces, and men's involvement in feminism throughout history. My definition of the feminist movement is a movement to liberate women from a patriarchal society that subjects them to violence, discrimination, and exploitation. Firstly, I will discuss the fight against gender norms. One of the battles that some feel should be fought under the banner of feminism is the battle against restrictive gender norms, which affects all genders. However, I disagree. While men are damaged by societal expectations, they are far less damaging to men than they are to women. For example, when men enter women-dominated spheres, their male privilege means that they rise to the top. 2 examples of this are in fashion and in cooking. While cooking is viewed as women's work, the vast majority of head chefs are men. In fact, there are more female CEOs than there are female head chefs. Similarly, while fashion is often viewed as a feminine interest, most of the major labels were started by men and bear their names. Examples include Ralph Lauren, Alexander McQueen, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Tom Ford, and Christian Dior. Yes, gender stereotypes are damaging to men, but their societal privilege means that it is easier for them to succeed when they enter women's spheres. In contrast, when women go into stereotypically male fields, like the sciences and technology, they often face stereotypes that they are less competent than men and face prejudice and harassment in the workplace. I believe that the fight against restrictive gender norms does not have to be a fight that is held within feminism. It is one that men can fight on their own. They do not need to co-opt the feminist banner. Secondly, men's voices tend to overpower women's voices. Feminist scholar Dale Spender noted that when she was at a feminist meeting recently, there were 32 women and 5 men, yet the men took up 50% of the conversation, and priority was given to the topics that they brought up. She did not think that this was a conscious move by any of the participants, but the fact is, we live in a society where men are given more space to speak than women are. This is a well-known phenomenon. In the average classroom, girls will speak roughly 25% of the time. Yet when girls speak 50% of the time, they are viewed as dominating the conversation. Consequently, men should not be allowed into these feminist discussion spaces because they dominate the discourse. Feminism cannot move forward by being dominated by the views of men. Moreover, in the public sphere, when men speak out on feminist issues, they receive a lot of positive attention. Their views are heavily publicized and they gain status and respect. In contrast, when women speak out on feminism, they are often portrayed as angry and unreasonable. Actor Matt McGorry has become an internet darling for speaking out on feminism. while lawyer Charlotte Proudman was pilloried and dubbed a feminazi by the Daily Mail for calling out a senior lawyer who felt it was appropriate to send her messages on LinkedIn commenting on her physical appearance. Feminism is a movement for women's liberation, and it's important that women's voices are heard. Men's voices drowning out women's ones is an extension of the patriarchy into the feminist movement. This silencing perpetuates the patriarchy and must be fought. Finally, men have had millennia to fight for women's rights and sort themselves out. Throughout history, women have suffered from male dominance, often viewed as nothing more than possessions. Yet first and second wave feminism were driven by women with very little male involvement. Very few men involved themselves in the fight for suffrage. During the sexual revolution and second wave feminism, men used feminism for their own ends. Women suddenly had the right to say yes to sex, but men hadn't accepted their ability to say no. Men only became heavily involved in the feminist movement when it became trendy and popular, but not because they realized on an intellectual level that a patriarchy that subjugates women is wrong. Some university-age men now use feminism as a way of talking to girls. Men's presence in feminism is unnecessary, counterproductive, and in fact an extension of the patriarchy which feminists are trying to free themselves from. Consequently, I urge men to reconsider whether they should thrust themselves into feminism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. We now move on to our first speaker for the opposition side, George Siddons.
Well, thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming along tonight. Evidently, Friday night timepiece is not what it used to be, as you've all chosen to come here and listen to us instead. Thank you, Daisy, for your fantastic speech. Very passionate. Unfortunately, it suffers the misfortune of being incorrect. So, you talked to us about what feminism is, and you told us that it was a struggle for women's liberation. Now, we think that that's a mistake. We think that feminism is actually about the total inequality of genders. And we think that, yes, feminism quite often does get misunderstood as a kind of battle for women. And that's understandable, because the majority of inequalities that face genders in our society fall upon women. Think about the pay gap, think about representation in parliament, think about businesses. There are countless examples of inequalities that fall upon women. But all that means is that feminism focuses primarily on women. It doesn't mean that feminism is a movement only for women. Feminism is about equality for all genders. And yes, that means for women. But it also means it's for men as well. It's for men who feel like they can't cry in public because other men will tell them to man up. It's for people who were born a different sex to the gender that they know they are. It's for people that reject binary gender norms altogether. It's for everyone that suffers from gender discrimination. So, whilst Daisy says that feminism is this movement for the liberation of women, we think that that's a misinterpretation of feminism's aims. We think that feminism is a movement about total gender equality. And we say that to exclude men, who represent roughly half of the population, from a movement which seeks gender equality is just illogical. So Megan and Daisy can have their movement that excludes men if they want, but they certainly can't call it feminism. And they can't really expect it to be successful. And that's my second point. Even if you don't buy the argument that I just said, pragmatically, men must be involved in feminism. Firstly, to achieve its aims, feminism must be inclusive. Because if feminism seeks to exclude men, and if feminism chooses to exclude men, and if feminism says we are a movement solely for women, then it becomes a battle between men and women. Now, we don't think that that's the best way to go about things, because when people feel like it's a fight between two sides, they tend to dig in and they tend to oppose the movement that they feel threatened by. Look at the reaction of men who misinterpret feminism as an attack on their masculinity. They dig their heels in and they resent the movement. We feel that's massively destructive, because the real problem here is gender inequality. The real problem is the inequality that's faced by everyone. So to say that men are excluded, to turn it into a fight between men and women, is ridiculous, because men and women shouldn't be fighting each other. We should be fighting inequality together. That is the only way that we're really going to tackle this, because by turning it into a battle between genders, we don't do anything. We just fight each other instead of fighting the real enemy here, which is inequality. Now, thirdly and finally, why feminism must be inclusive. And I think this is probably the most important point, actually. Most men don't really realise what it's like to be discriminated against because of our gender. We don't know what it's like to walk down the street and be heckled because of what we're wearing. We don't know what it's like to know that if we go into a profession, we can expect to be paid less than our peers of a different gender. We don't know what it's like to look at businesses and to look at Parliament and to see them filled with people who look nothing like us and who don't understand our views. And it means that a lot of men are accidentally complicit in the patriarchy. We think that most men really aren't sexist. Most men, if they understood the discrimination that women face, would be absolutely appalled and would be on board and would join the fight for gender equality. But by excluding men from the feminist movement, you stop them from learning about that. You stop them from realising where they're wrong. By including men in the feminist movement and by bringing them in, we can help to teach them about the privileges that they face, about the ways in which they might be enforcing gender norms, and we can help them to fight inequality together. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my real message today. To fight inequality, we need unity. It's too big an issue to be divisive over. It's too big an issue to squabble amongst ourselves over. Feminism is stronger as a united, open movement than as a divisive one. And the only way that we're going to defeat inequality is with a strong, open, and inclusive movement. So I urge you to vote for the opposition on this, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
George and Megan is going to come back on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you to continue the case for the proposition, as this House believes that men have no place in feminism. Now, in this country, things are a lot better than they were. Women now have the vote, women can become engineers and CEOs, women can hold titles and have land. However, the glass ceiling still exists. Attitudes towards women mean that we are not held in the same esteem as men. Lord Davis's target of corporate boards having at least a third of women by 2011 has sadly been missed, and there is still a very long way to go in terms of equality for women. Whether or not they choose it, men still benefit from patriarchal dividends, and feminism is still very much needed in today's society. So before I continue, I would like to remind you of Daisy's definition, in that gender equality and the abolition of gender norms are both admirable pursuits. And they are pursuits in their own right, but they are very different to feminism. Feminism is the liberation of women. It is not to say that men cannot be pro-feminism. It is not to say that men cannot be supporters of feminism. Simply that a man cannot presume to speak in a woman's place or decide what feminism should be about, especially when considering the very reason that feminism was formed. I shall give you 3 points. Number 1, exploring how this further perpetuates the idea that women can only be important in connection with men. Number 2, how men saying, I'm a feminist, actually reduces efforts against the patriarchy. And number 3, how men are often unaware of how situations and their actions can be interpreted by women. So firstly, one of the arguments used to encourage men to join the feminist movement, or to sympathise with it, is the phrase that could be your mother or your sister. Now, whilst this might be a good idea to encourage men to think twice about attitudes towards women, it's inherently damaging to the cause. It reinforces the idea that women are not important, that they are not people in their own right, and that they're only important in society when connected with men. This, in a movement about the liberation of women, is very damaging. We should not be treated in a certain way because it would make another person feel bad. Women should be treated as people, as individuals in their own right, not as an extension of a man. Secondly, there is a growing concern that the inclusion of men within the feminist movement actually inhibits growth and makes men less reflective on the patriarchy and misogyny. Saying, I'm a feminist, has become something of a fashion statement, something that's become trendy or cool to say, but how many people actually use it as an excuse? How many people will openly objectify women, make a crass comment about their appearance or their life choices, and then attempt to justify it by saying, that's okay, I'm a feminist? Being a feminist doesn't mean you can just say, I support women's rights to equality. Being a feminist means you will actively challenge anything that prevents women from being accepted in society in their own right or on their own merits. It is speaking against anything that advocates the oppression of women. Again, it is being active in the liberation of women in society.
Consequently, using the term feminist so flippantly trivialises the cause, and it really, really makes a difference on the efforts of the women who are working so tirelessly to make our society a fairer place. And thirdly, men can sympathise but cannot empathise with certain scenarios, which ties in quite nicely to what George said earlier. Knowledge does not equal understanding. Men are often unaware of how certain situations and actions can be perceived by women. Most men would not think twice about walking home alone in the dark. Yet for women, this can be an incredibly stressful experience. It's something one has to consider when attending any event later in the evening. And again, what some men might perceive as friendly or flirty, such as blocking a path or doorway, a comment on someone's appearance, or just being a bit close and invading personal space, can be perceived as very threatening and intimidating by a lot of women. Spotting a crowd or even a solitary man whilst walking alone can be both daunting and alarming. Men are often much taller, heavier and stronger than women, and consequently, many men are unaware of how intimidating their physical stature can be. This is not necessarily the first thing that would come to mind if a man happened upon a stranger in the street. Furthermore, not only should men not presume to speak for women due to having different experiences and perceptions, but when they do so, intentionally or not, they are extending their sense of male entitlement, and again, in both cases, they are damaging the cause. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, for the three reasons I have given you, because women are women in their own right, they are people in their own right, and not extensions of men. Because the inclusion of men in a movement makes them less proactive and less reflective on misogyny, and because men cannot accurately represent or discuss a situation that is foreign to them, I strongly urge you to propose this motion. Thank you very much.
Hand over to Georgia, who is our final speaker before the question time.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to build upon the points which George raised, but elaborate them, looking more at how we need social structural change for feminism, and for social structural change. Obviously, we need all of society involved. I'm also going to go expand this point, saying how it helps discrimination in other areas, and how this will also include it helps with men. But I'll first address a few points which has been raised. Firstly, there was question over the definition, and we fully agree with that side. We are going for women's liberation. If a woman is liberated, she is equal. If a woman is equal within her society, it's more likely that other social groups are going to be equal, because what we want to do is raise awareness, educate people, and make a change. The other side saying that being a feminist means that people aren't just claiming to be a feminist, they actively participate. Why can't a man actively participate? The reason was raised because they cannot empathise. I cannot empathise with ethnic minority issues. I cannot empathise with LGBTQ+ issues. Does that mean I cannot stand up and say, I believe there should be change and I believe there should be liberation when people are being oppressed in these areas, and there should be equality? So surely saying that a man cannot do the same for a woman is absurd as an initial premise. Now onto my main arguments. So as we have already heard, women, there is an issue that they're not equally represented in business, they're not equally represented in parliament, and there is a gender pay gap. Well, but we have laws which legislate there should not be a gender pay gap. We have laws which say that there should be equality in the workplace, and this has not happened. Why has this not happened? It's because of the social structure that we are in. Evidently, somewhere along the line, from a child starting primary school to a child wishing to enter, an adult wishing to enter the workplace, they might have been discouraged somewhere. For some reason, they've still got a glass ceiling. To make the change, we need social change, a social structural change. How on earth can we make a social structural change with only half of society being invited to make the change? Surely, if there is a social structural change we need all of society. That will include men as well. By telling 50% of the population they cannot participate in our change, we are alienating them. We are actively going against equality. We are not going to create any change which we are wishing to have. Consequently, we need to have men involved in feminism. My second point was helping discrimination with wider society. There is, at the moment, issues within other groups in society. I was going to say minorities, but women aren't really a minority, and there's still an issue there. This affects all individuals, be it ethnic minorities, religious minorities. So consequently, what we need there to be a moral change for all individuals. By saying we need women to be equally represented, we need women to be equally accepted in society, we need these changes for women, we're highlighting that there is an issue, and we're highlighting that there can be a change and there can be a positive change. This can then filter on to other groups within our society which need the same sort of change. So consequently, by saying we as feminists need to include all of society, what we are saying is we as feminists believe that all people are equal. And to use the proposition's definition, we need people to be liberated, be that women from the gender norms, or be that other groups within our society. So consequently, as a movement, we are aiming to include all people. We're aiming to make a change for all people. Therefore, yet again, we need all of society within our movement. Consequently, feminism is for men as well as it is for women. And my last point is that feminism can also help men. The proposition have already said they don't want men co-opting the feminist banner. So they don't want men to stand up and say, we want equality, we want liberation of all people. They are not co-opting the feminist banner. What they are doing is they're making a movement of change and a movement for all people. At the moment, between the ages of 10 to 34, suicide is the second biggest killer for men. This isn't saying that there is less. They said that the men are less damaged within our society. I think that shows that men are still very damaged, especially when it comes to emotional issues. As my partner said, a man is not expected to be allowed to cry in public. It's not seen as masculine to seek help. Again, these are issues which should be addressed. They can be addressed if we address the issue of gender problems. Consequently, I believe that you should vote against the motion. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Georgia. So now it's time for you guys to get stuck in this debate. So I hope you've been thinking of your questions, and if I haven't chosen you, please remember you can also tweet me via the hashtag DebSoc. Okay, so the first question, please. The girl in the check shirt.
My question is for the proposition. If you are saying you don't want men in the feminist movement because they take it over, shouldn't women, being women, naturally be the leaders of that? So if you're saying you don't want them in because they'll take it over, does that not show that it's almost like perpetuating the patriarchy by saying that women can't, if men are there, women don't have the ability to lead it?
I don't think that's what we're saying at all. What we're saying is we are socialised to accept, firstly, within the feminist movement, we are socialised to kind of perceive what men are saying as more valid. We're socialised to let them speak more. So that means that within feminist spaces, man's voices can be more prominent than we would necessarily like them to be. However, the main issue with men in feminism is the fact that people outside of the feminist movement are more willing to listen to men who take on the banner of feminism than women who take on the banner of feminism. And this is a problem because it means that, women who are coming up with feminist thought are not being heard, whereas, some actor can sort of put a few feminist tweets out there and get massive amounts of attention and be sort of heralded as sort of the feminist of 2015.
Comment on that?
Yep.
I mean, that's simply not true. The number of high-profile female feminists is huge versus the number of male high-profile feminists. And I personally don't see why you can't have high-profile male feminists who aren't seeking to co-opt the movement, who are just seeking to help the movement and try and do their bit for equality. I don't think that that's a problem.
Okay, does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Well, I'll go back to the original question. We haven't said that men can't support feminism. We're just saying that within the movement itself, we still have a lot of ground to cover. And unfortunately, a consequence of today's society is that men seem to have more sway over people. and people seem to respect men's views more than women's. So what we're saying is, until the ground of the equality is being made, we do need to make sure that within feminist circles it is mainly women's voices speaking, that it is women's voices speaking, and that we are being hit. So what we're saying is a direct consequence of what's actually happening in society.
How do you plan to make those gains for equality if you're excluding half of the population from your movement? It just doesn't make sense. You say we need gains for equality, yet half of the population aren't welcome in this movement.
Well, I think that it's ridiculous to assume that you can't make societal change with more than 50% of the population. I mean, like, look at it. The country is now conservative, but it wasn't 50% of the country who voted for the Conservatives. You can make change without the majority of people agreeing with it. And moreover, you can... So, for example, like, you know, privileged white men are a very tiny amount of the population, yet they managed to make a huge amount of change. So I don't see why 50% of the women can't make a change.
Okay, thank you very much. We are going to move on to the next question. This one is coming in from someone called Polly on Twitter. So Polly says, it seems the opposition's arguments are towards the gender equality movement, not feminism. What's the distinction? So do one of you want to take this up?
Well, as was defined, that we were defining feminism as the liberation of women. So we are agreeing with that definition. Feminism is the liberation of women, but we're extending that argument. If you say we're raising awareness that women need liberating in certain areas, we're raising awareness that there is an issue, we're raising awareness that there needs to be further education, and we're going for equality. So by raising awareness that women need liberating, we're going to move on to equality. If we start getting equality in one area, it'll extend to raising awareness and getting equality in all other areas. So we're saying that the feminist movement as such will lead on to gender equality in all areas.
Okay, we're going to hear from you guys and then George, you can come back on it.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying. We are aiming for gender equality, but as we have clearly stated, at the moment, gender equality is a separate issue. There are issues with gender norms across the UK, but as we've clearly defined, that is a separate issue. Feminism is for the liberation of women. We should be working with these groups, but feminism is primarily a women's group. It's leading for women, helping women to support them to get into these roles that society will not let them do.
All right, thank you very much. Let's take... Oh yeah, we're going to take you first.
I think it's important to note that, I mean, this is my first point really. Yes, feminism is primarily about the liberation of women, but that's only because the greater inequalities are faced by women. So yes, feminism is about the liberation of women, but in the wider context of gender equality. The ultimate aim is gender equality. So you may say that it's about the liberation of women, but we think that's a fairly narrow view of feminism, and that comes from the fact that greater inequalities are faced by women. So yes, the first priority has to be women, but in the wider context of gender equality as a whole.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to the next question. The girl with the green shirt and blonde hair. You, yes.
Okay, I have a question for the proposition. I've always understood feminism as being mainly about getting the freedom to choose for yourself, and that your choices are not dictated by your sex. I can choose if I want to be a stay-at-home mom or become the prime minister. Is it then ridiculous to take away someone else's choice based on their sex? That they do not get the choice to get really involved in the feminist movement?
So to clarify, that question was, is it not a part of feminism to let you choose, and aren't you taking away choice from males?
Well, no, but I think that, you know, groups being exclusive is not necessarily a negative thing. I think we can all agree that, you know, there are some groups, you know, for example, if you were going to have, you know, civil rights groups, I don't think it would be unfair for black people or any people of colour to want that to be exclusively for them. At the same time, I don't think it's unfair for women to want to have feminism be for them. I think that, you know, men have a lot of choices within society, and I don't see why they have to choose to dilute feminism and force their way into this space. I think actually it's a sign of male entitlement that men demand to enter feminism when they are not necessarily helping the movement.
All right, thank you very much. Do you guys want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, men aren't demanding to enter the feminist movement. There are men all over the world who are saying, look, we realise that there's a problem, and we think that the way society treats women is really, really bad, and we want to try and help make that better. Men aren't trying to co-opt the feminist movement or steal the feminist movement from women. We're just trying to help gender equality achieve its aims. That's all we're trying to do. I find it quite offensive, the idea that you think men can't just get involved in the feminist movement because they want gender equality and because they think that the way society treats women is bad. Why can't men just do that? We're not trying to steal anything from you.
All right, Megan's going to say something, then Georgia.
You might not be consciously trying to steal it, but the way that society is working at the moment, men do steal the attention, they do steal the voices away from women. So whilst it may not be a conscious effort, it's actually a direct consequence of society at the moment, so I really don't buy your argument.
All right, we're going to hear from Georgia.
Okay, we've agreed that there's an issue with society. Let's change society. How are we going to change society without including all of society? The proposition keeps on having this idea of a huge fear of letting men be involved because everybody will stop listening to women. Why would it be wrong for a man, if he has got a moral conscience, to say, there is an issue, let's make a change? You're saying that men's voices are heard too much? Let's educate people. Let's tell them. Let's show them. What better way to show people and educate people than get them involved? As soon as you say that there is a segregation, that you're not included within our movement, they're not going to listen. We're not going to be able to educate them about issues. There will not be a social change, and that is what we want.
All right, we are going to move on. We're going to take a question from Twitter. If this isn't encouragement to get you tweeting, I don't know what is. So, it is from Elizabeth Wright. If we exclude men from the feminist movement, where does that leave trans men and non-binary people? Let's not make it exclusive. So who wants to take that one first?
I'll take it.
All right, Megan.
We're not necessarily excluding anyone in general. Anyone who defines themselves as female would be inclusive in this movement. What we're saying is female voices are the priority. Now, we're not saying other people can't help us out, but what we're saying is they cannot physically be involved in the movement because, as we've stated again and again, they are drowning out the voices of women who need to be heard, and that is what we need to change.
And I think also, non-binary people, I think, should be involved with feminism because I think that, I think gender is a spectrum, and I think people who do actually suffer from the sort of, I think it's the way that society treats them. If society is treating them in sort of a way that is prejudiced against them for their gender and for, having, female attributes or something like that, then yes, they are suffering from the same oppression as people who are, binary women, and yes, they should be allowed to be involved.
All right, who wants to come back on that, Georgia?
Yeah, as the proposition they just said, that men can help, but they can't be involved with the movement. How can somebody help if they're not involved within the movement? So we totally agree with the idea that, of course, as we're saying, everybody should be involved. We're wanting equality, we're wanting change. If somebody defines themselves in a different sexual orientation, as has been mentioned, why cannot they be involved and help with change? So we'd agree with the question.
And George?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, you kind of hit the nail on the head there with what we're trying to say. There's a contradiction inside Proposition's argument between saying we're a movement for equality and saying here's a massive group of people who we don't think can be part of it. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head and said that there's a contradiction there, and that's why we don't think that your argument works.
All right, we're going to go to the next question now. The guy in the check shirt, you.
Are you optimistic about the future of feminism in the world, whether it be with or without men?
Okay, so for those of you who didn't hear the question, are you optimistic about feminism in the future? Are you going to take that?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic, actually. There is a lot gathering within the press about the progression of feminism. A lot of businesses are doing a lot to counteract this. If you take, for example, there's a very, very big, am I allowed to say names? Yeah. McKinsey is a very, very big consulting agency. They do a lot of work. They've actually got several initiatives to get women specifically into consulting. PwC, again, women in business specifically into these areas. In academia, another issue where women are majorly underrepresented in higher levels are pushing to get women in. So I am optimistic. There's a lot of positive press about it. And there is a long way to go in the movement, but there are a lot of people who are wanting to join, who are wanting to get involved, that are not necessarily seeing feminism as man-hating, but the sense of female liberation, and who feel that this is something that they need in society to help them as well as other people.
Yeah, I'm optimistic if the opposition wins tonight. I think the worst thing the feminist movement can do is exclude people. And interestingly, all Megan's examples of kind of victories for feminism, victories for women in business have taken place in a society in which men are currently welcoming the feminist movement. So if the feminist movement can achieve all of these things with men involved as well, then what's the need to kick men out? What's the need to go backwards, and what's the need to be regressive? We think we should move forwards, and we think we should welcome everybody into the movement. And if we can do that, then yes, I'm very optimistic.
And anyone else want to say anything on that matter? Or can we move on? Let's move on. All right. This question is coming in all the way from Leicester, from our ex-president, Chloe Vitcon. And she says, the other movements you've been talking about are minorities, so they need as many others to have their voice heard. As women aren't a minority, does excluding men give the movement more legitimacy and independence, thus emphasising the feminist cause? Who wants to take that one? Okay. So basically she's saying that because women aren't technically a minority, whereas other minority movements that might need as many people to come in to give it legitimacy, the fact that women aren't a minority, do they actually need more people to help the cause?
Well, as we have said time and time again, we're wanting a social change. To have a social change, you need all of society. Women aren't a minority, but in many areas they are. Within business they are, within politics they are, within any high-earning careers, normally they are. And so since they are being treated like a minority, I see no difference of facing feminism the same way as you face any other or any minority movement and wish for minority liberation, because women are being treated as a minority. But the same way that if you were talking about an ethnic minority and wanting a change for them, it would be bizarre to say, okay, we want 50% of the population to support us, and then that's enough. We'll then close our doors and we don't want any more people to support us. Surely if we're wanting change, we want as many people involved as possible.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to build on that. If the premise of feminism is that society is largely dominated by men, and that's true. So if there's anybody that feminism needs to convince to liberate women, then surely it's men, because if men have their levers on the hands of power, excluding men from the feminist movement is only going to make them hostile to it, and you're going to go backwards away from your aims.
Well, surely, Georgia, that if we are being treated as a minority, we should show them how big we are and how we can unite together to present a united front against those who would oppress us. And secondly, George, we're saying they can be pro-feminism, they can be supporters of feminism, they just can't be actively involved in the movement, which is a very different situation.
That seems like a fairly arbitrary definition to me. That seems like a fairly arbitrary distinction between supporters and feminists.
We're going to let Julie say something.
Yeah, we should put forward a united front. Why don't we put forward a united front with everybody who believes in this movement? Why don't we put forward a united front with everybody who believes that there should no longer be a gender pay gap, that there should no longer be a discrepancy with people within the working area? So I totally agree with Megan. We will put forward a united front. Why are we suddenly saying that certain members of our society cannot join us on the united front if they have the same aims, they have the same ambitions, and if with them we will progress faster?
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move back to the floor. So, question from the guy in the white t-shirt.
This is more a question of proposition. Can you give me an example of any actual social movement that has actually progressed without sort of a certain group? Because if you look at the anti-apartheid movement, if you look at the civil rights movement, the anti-slavery movement, the gay rights movement, all of these movements have included vast groups of society, women, men, black, white, mixed race, and whatever you think. All of these different movements have had different groups of people. So is there any example where one group of people have actually progressed socially?
Okay, thank you. Just to repeat that question for those who didn't hear, can you please give an example of any movement that's worked without the inclusion of all people?
Well, I think a very obvious one to use would be suffrage, women's suffrage within the UK. You know, actually, I think women's suffrage is the only terrorist movement that has had all its aims achieved within this country. The WSPU, which was one of the main suffrage groups, their leadership was entirely women, and the majority of their membership was entirely women, and they were one of the major suffrage groups. And the other suffrage group, which I cannot currently remember the name of, was also majority women and was majority led by women. This is a huge example. And the thing is, at heart, you know, we are 50% of the population. Like, things have passed with far less support than that. I think 50%, we can take that. You know, trade unions go on strike with far less than 50% of the vote. You can make a change with 50% or less of people.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to say?
Well, I mean, again, that's just simply not true. The suffrage movement did have broad support. Political parties, the Conservative Party, helped out there. It had broad support. It wasn't a movement that just said, we are only for women. It was a wider movement. So, frankly, that example is false.
I disagree with that. I would disagree with that. I mean, if you look at the suffrage movement, one of the suffragettes actually chained herself to a statue in the House of Commons and was forcibly removed, and you can actually still see the damage on that statue because they had to pull the chains off and damage it to try and stop the Parliamentary Congress running through. And as the procession went through, she had to be removed before that procession went through because they didn't want to deal with it.
Okay, yeah, so throughout history there have been movements, and movements have actually had positive effects. The movements during the suffragette movement, there might have been more women than men involved. That does not mean that there was not a single man who was involved. That does not mean that suddenly you cannot have men involved within the movement. So saying that there were more women, yes, saying that they actively discriminated and actively said a man cannot join. If a man said, we believe in your cause, they did not turn him away. So consequently, it isn't true. So I don't see why we are still arguing this point.
We are not saying that men cannot help, but we are saying that in terms of like the leadership, in terms of the leading lights, in terms of those who really identify, it should be women. And this was the case in the suffragette movement, and this should be the case in feminism today.
All right, this moves on nicely to another question on Twitter. This is from Dane Harrison, and it says, so do you think men's rights activism has a role within feminism at all? What is that role?
Well, I mean, it's a thorny issue, that one, to say the least. I think, to be honest, I think the solution is, men, if you are getting involved in the feminist movement, don't do what the proposition think you're going to do. Don't try and take it over. Don't try and co-opt it. Let the people in charge of the feminist movement, who are largely women, teach you about how the feminist movement works and get involved like that. Men's rights activism, unfortunately, a lot of the time presents itself as an opposition to feminism. I don't think that needs to be the case. I think men can get involved in feminism and seek gender equality for the issues that do affect men, but I don't think we need to have kind of men's rights activists who are out there fighting feminism. I think that's as counterproductive as having a feminist movement which excludes men. I think if both sides become exclusive, it becomes incredibly unhelpful.
Could I add? Yep. But there's also areas like if men and when men have equal paternity pay and paternity leave as women, then women are not going to be stuck at home to raise children. So there are certain areas where we need to make it equal. And if it is things like that, then yeah, there needs to be a change within that too.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. So let's have the girl in the green jumper.
Going back to the suffragettes movement, could you not argue that that was a lot more about like legal things such as getting the vote and stuff like that? And since that only took kind of like getting a majority in Parliament to get, I personally think like third wave feminism now is a lot more about the fact that we have all the legal things. We should have equal pay, we should have equality, but it's just not happening sort of de facto. Could you not argue that feminism now needs to be about social climate, like getting people to understand feminism, not just getting it through Parliament on a bill, but getting men and women to understand what it's about and changing the way they think.
All right, thank you. To clarify, that question was, do you not think that now that we're in sort of the third wave of feminism, that it should be more sort of about getting people to understand feminism, process this idea of rights, rather than just getting legal rights?
Well, I think firstly that depends whether or not you limit your sort of view of, I think it depends on the scope of this argument, because, yes, while we do have a lot of legal protections in this country, that is not true for women in other countries. Not all countries have, equal pay laws. Not all countries have the same protections for women in the law. I mean, yes, we do have a lot of legislation that means women are protected, but, we have things like, there's a lot more that could be done legally to help women. One of those examples would be, like Georgia mentioned earlier, would be more paternity leave for fathers and having their paternity leave enshrined in law, because that would mean that women, the onus on childcare would no longer be solely on women. And I think that, yes, there are a lot of social change that needs to be made, but I don't think that feminism is solely a legal movement. Not just, I don't think it's solely a social movement and not sort of a legal one. Not just in the UK, but also abroad.
Also, you spoke about understanding and how we need to encourage people to engage and understand feminism. And as I feel that Daisy and I did bring to you in our speeches, we don't fully understand how people who've never been subject to something can then claim to understand it. Knowledge is not understanding. So I don't understand how the inclusion of someone who's never experienced it, who doesn't really understand what it's about, can then convey that understanding to other people.
Can I come in on that? Because we've got another really interesting contradiction in the argument here. Because they've told us that men can't be involved in the feminist movement because we just don't understand what women go through. But they then said that the feminist movement in the UK should look outwards and should look globally. Now, do either of you have any idea what it's like to be a woman in rural India, in rural Africa, in all of these places? Do you have any idea what that's like? And as such, are you capable of representing them if you think that knowledge doesn't mean understanding?
No.
You've never experienced it.
Megan's going to come back on this one. No, I'm not going to claim to have understanding for them, but surely having male voices dominate the feminist movement in their country will then scare them away and not allow them to give us that understanding of their lives. Having men involved in the movement in their countries is not necessarily going to help them portray their voices, so I don't understand why we should claim to represent their views, because they should be representing their own views. And surely in these patriarchal-centred countries, they should have a platform for their voice without worrying about what's going to happen to them, and without men overpowering their voices, their opinions, and their experiences.
I think it's a mischaracterization to say that we are trying to, represent women abroad. I think women who live in other countries where maybe they don't have those legal protections know the problems that they face and are capable of speaking out on them. I don't think they necessarily need us, very privileged people in Exeter, to speak out on their problems.
Okay, so should privileged white women therefore be excluded from the feminist movement in developing countries?
Yes.
For that reason?
Yes. I would say yes.
Okay, so you're becoming more and more exclusive now. So you're saying the only people that can be involved in your movement are people that directly experience the things that they're fighting for. That leaves you with a pretty small number of people, and to be honest, it's just destructive to your movement. You're splintering off. The best way to achieve gender equality is to work together, and not by saying, oh no, you can't be part of our movement because you come from a different place. You can't be part of our movement because you're a different gender. You can't be part of our movement because you have a different income to me. That's just fundamentally
Surely
unhelpful.
all movements have many arms.
I think the thing is, at heart, what we're trying to deal with here is people who are in greater positions of power entering movements and, diluting them, drowning them out, and, leading to them not being radical and not talking about the issues that really need to be talked about and not being able to be a spearhead and deal with these problems.
All right, okay, one more from Georgia and then we're moving on to the next question.
In many countries, in many places, women do not have a voice at all. So are we going to say that if the only voice knocking around is going to be a man who will stand up and start to raise awareness, will start to educate, he cannot? There needs to be somewhere to start. And if the voices which are going to be heard initially are men's, why shouldn't they be men? Surely it's better for a man to speak than for nobody to speak at all.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on to the next question. So we're going to go up in the wings because you guys haven't had any chance to say anything. So the person with glasses over there. Yep.
I was just wondering how the proposition responds to one of the leaders in the feminist movement, Laura Bates, from the Everyday Sexism Project, who talks about the need to kind of inform, educate, and also that have men inform, educate men equally. And like feminism is about gender equality. Why would you exclude men? If it isn't about gender equality, what is it about?
Okay, so if feminism is about gender equality, why would you exclude men? And if it isn't, then what is it about?
Well, I think we dealt with that very early on. Feminism is a move to liberate women from the patriarchal structure and not a movement for gender equality. So, yes.
As we've clearly said, gender equality is a separate and admirable issue, but it's not feminism. Feminism is the liberation of women.
All right, anything else? Or
I think us and most of the audience would disagree with you. I can see, like I said in my first point, we can see why feminism gets misinterpreted as a movement solely for the liberation of women, because inequalities fall largely on women. Yes, feminism deals primarily with women's issues. We've said this before, and we'll say it again. That happens in the wider context of gender equality.
And if you liberate a woman, you are going to be making her equal. So it ends up being pretty much the same thing. The woman is liberated, she is equal. So it is gender equality through liberation.
All right, thank you very much. We've got a tweet comment here, so it's not a question, it's just a point to be made. And this comes in from Amy Hopkins. She said that suffragettes were unsuccessful, the suffragists were the one making the changes, and they weren't female only. #learn your history. So we're going to now move on to another question. The person in the navy top, yep, blonde hair.
I would like to bring the following statistic to the proposition's attention. On September 30th, in the Wall Street Journal, the following statistic was published. At the current pace of progress, we are more than 100 years away from gender equality in the C-suite. I think that refers to the workplace. We reached the moon in 8 years of concentrated effort, not 18. Let's bring that same urgency to this mission. I'd like to finish off by saying, don't we have a responsibility to get this through? And yes, it's really important that in society we have men who recognize women's values, but the fact of the matter is, I want to work in finance, and I want to go right to the top, and I want someone to enable, to stand up and say, you can do that. And I was educated in an all-girls school, and I totally believe that women can do it all, but don't we have to swallow our stubbornness at this point and say, we can't do it, and say, please men, help us to get this through.
Okay, so do we need to potentially swallow our pride and ask men for help to get this through? Who's going to take that one? Can we have quiet, please, so that the speakers can be heard? George is going to speak.
We totally agree with your first point that we need to hurry up, but we're not so sure about the second one, saying, please men help us. We're not saying, please men help us. We're saying, look, there is an issue. Surely don't you agree that if a woman is as intelligent as a man, if a woman is as capable as a man, as a woman is as educated as a man, she should be in the same position. So it isn't saying we need help from men. We're saying if there are individuals who are men who recognize that women are equal to men, why aren't they not allowed to say it and be part of the feminist movement, which is saying there is no reason to oppress a group within our society? So it's not please help us, it's recognize that there is an inequality and there is no reason for that inequality, recognize it and help us make the change together.
All right, we're going to take Meg and then George.
I don't think we necessarily need to say, please help us, because we are quite capable of doing it ourselves. And what's interesting is that you mentioned that you went to an all-girls school and you've got the confidence to get to the top. Now, actually, in education, that's something that's happening more regularly. Particularly in my school, we were involved in an initiative in which our English classes were segregated because they found, yet again, the male voices in the classroom were drowning out those of the women. So by segregating the classes, both sides learned more efficiently and were more open to discussion. So I do disagree with the fact that we should be asking them for help, and I do agree that we should be encouraging other women to want to make it to the top of their field, like you were at your school.
All right, George is going to chip in.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure I'd phrase it in quite the same way as you did, but I mean, basically, you know, let's get this done. Gender equality's been around for way too long. It's caused way too many people problems. We just need to get this fixed as quickly as possible. And to be honest, whatever that takes, we're willing to vote for it. We're not really that fussed about ideological purity, because you can sit there and be ideologically pure for 100 years, or you can side with us, throw away the ideological purity, say everyone is welcome, and let's say, just get this done, let's get equality now.
All right, so we have now one final question before we wrap up for this evening. So we will take the person at the back in the white jumper.
Yeah, this is to the proposition. So in your first speech, you said that men tend to succeed in what you think are women's areas. So if you think feminism is a women's area, do you not need men in it to succeed in it and drive it forwards?
So the question was, if feminism is sort of a woman's area, do you not need men in it to put it forward?
Are you kidding me right now? No, absolutely not. I said that men tend to succeed more in sort of traditional women's field because of the privilege society gives to them, not because they're more talented. It's not like, oh, they're doing better because they're so intelligent. If only we had more men in the feminist movement, those intelligent men could help us and tell us where all our silly women were going wrong.
I mean, we're broadly with Daisy on that one, but I really don't think that it's an issue of men should be leading the feminist movement. I think that would be really, really unhelpful. The feminist movement is something that primarily focuses on women, and as such, I think it should primarily be led by women. All we're saying is let men in if they believe in gender equality. Let men express that and let them be part of it. We're not saying that men are trying to take this over. We're not saying that. We think it should be run by women, but we just think the men should be able to play a part in a movement that they want to play a part in. That's really all we're arguing for tonight.
All right, I think that brings us on quite nicely to our summary speeches. So, summarising the debate for the proposition is going to be Daisy. Daisy, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, at heart, I think the problem with involving men in feminism is, this desire, let's make feminism nice, he for she, let's make it really palatable for men so that they want to get involved, men, we can help you too. You can cry in public if you become a feminist. I don't think it's helpful because at heart, I think that, a true society where we have real, liberation for women and true feminist equality is not one that many men want. And do you know why? Because men do not want to give up their privilege. Men are privileged in so many ways that they don't even realise. An example of one, this is one thing that people don't notice, but, often a man will be hitting on you in a nightclub, and, you'll say, I'm not really interested. You'll try and show that you're not interested with your body language, with the answers you're giving, and in the end, you'll have to say, I'm sorry, I have a boyfriend. Why is this? It's because men only respect another man's ownership over your body. They do not respect your right to say no. They do not respect your right to reject them. And, I think that's the thing. Men are not willing to give up their privilege, and that is why feminism needs to be a radical movement driven by women to fight for what we deserve and for what is right and for our own liberation. Thank you.
All right, and George is going to summarise for us on the opposition.
Okay, thank you. Our case is really a case of pragmatism. Now, we actually accept everything that Daisy said. We know, and I know, that men don't really understand a lot of the problems that women face. But excluding men from the movement is just so unhelpful, because if you exclude them, you make it into a battle between men and women, you stop men from learning about the ways in which they might be accidentally enforcing these gender norms, and you just alienate them from a movement that they really may want to be part of. So we say that, you can keep your ideological purity. Fine, have that. But if we really, really want gender equality to happen, then we think that we need as many people as we can on side. And that's partly because society is structured so that men have their hands on the levers of power. So therefore, if you need to convince anyone, you need to convince men. But it's also primarily because the main thing that feminism needs, and this came up a couple of times in the questions, the main thing that feminism needs to aim for at the moment is social change. As people said, the legal changes have already been made, but they've made no difference because society is structured in a way that benefits men. And a lot of men actually want to change that. A lot of men are uncomfortable with that as an idea. A lot of men are uncomfortable with their privilege. If you let them get involved, they can help. I think that's the message we're trying to convey this evening. And men aren't trying to co-opt the feminist movement. They're not trying to make it something that's a men's movement. They're not trying to use it to pick up women. They're not trying to do that. Most men hate sexism. Most men want equality. Let us in. Let us fight gender inequality together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all the speakers, for a very heated and exciting debate. Before we move on to the final vote, we are just going to quickly announce the winner of the bottle of wine for tonight, and that goes to Elizabeth Wright for her question about where it's sort of excluding men leaves trans and non-binary people. So you can come and collect that at the end. And if she's not here and you're watching online, then you can Facebook message someone from DebSoc and collect it that way. Okay. So now for the final vote. So this time you cannot abstain. So if you want to vote for the proposition side on the merits of the argument, this House believes that men have no place in feminism, please raise your hand. And if you oppose the motion, please raise your hand. All right, fantastic. Despite a very impressive swing, the motion has been defeated.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. I think the four speakers really gave it their best go, and there was a definite swing towards one side by the end, so really well done to them. Please come and join us again next Friday when we will be trying to our normal format of 4 outside speakers. Sign up for the Rail L Trail tomorrow morning. It's going to be epic. It's going to be one of those stories from uni you'll want to have forever. It'll be really good. And come and play a Trivial Sport for us. So thank you very much. See you next Friday.